Hi, Misha here. And I've been kind of going over the fighters of, well, really Imperial Japan and modern day Japan, the JASDF. Anyway, and originally I was just going to put this in with other videos, but I decided why not focus for a relatively short video on the Japanese Mitsubishi F-104J and F-104DJ, known in the USA as Starfighter, but known in Japan as Glory. And I have two models here. There's a F-104J sitting here from Witty Wings, and there's actually just a standard F-104D, not a DJ, from Hobby Master, but it'll do. It's from Taiwan, but close enough. Both are 1/72 scale die-cast metal. And that also might be kind of fun to compare a Witty Wings plane versus a Hobby Master plane, because there's things to be said about both. But anyway, I can't resist history. So in the late 50s, the Japanese Air Force was looking for a new air superiority fighter, Interceptor, and this would be their first supersonic jet. They had previously been flying the F-86F and the F-86D from America. And at this time, they still didn't really have a design and manufacturing industry for aircraft, so they were looking at foreign designs. So they sent a team out around 1960 to look at what was going on, primarily focusing on American designs. And their kind of initial short list included, of course, the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. It also included the North American F-100 Super Sabre, which made sense considering they were using the Sabre. It included the Convair F-102. And it included the Northrop 156, which was essentially the combat version of the T-38 Talon. And it included a prototype from Grumman, the G98. Of these, the F-100 Super Sabre was quickly knocked out because it was viewed as more of a fighter-bomber than a interceptor air superiority. It really came down to the Grumman design and the Lockheed. And in December of 1960, the Japanese government announced that the Lockheed design the Starfighter best suited their needs. And the version they worked with Lockheed to configure was based on the F-104G, but altered, of course, for the JASDF. Mainly, it had its ground attack abilities removed because the Japanese Constitution forbade war, and at this time the Allies were still very restrictive in what Japan could do. This was, within the first decade of them being allowed to have their own military. So they removed its ability to carry bombs, took away the bomb sight naming device. Still had a gun though. They let them keep that. And it would be used with a Japanese-produced version of the J79 engine. Just little tweaks. Not really that much. The first pre-production model made by Lockheed in America flew in June of 1961. And then a licensing agreement was set up with Mitsubishi. The first 3 F-104Js would be built entirely in America by Lockheed and then flown to Japan. These would be patterning and test models. The next 29 would be assembled in the USA by Lockheed and then taken apart into what they called knockdown kits, components, essentially parts kits, and then reassembled in Japan by Mitsubishi. It's late, I'm tired. And this would really gain them even more experience on how things work and how to do it right. And then the final planes would be built entirely in Japan. Not only built there, but they would be built using Japanese parts. And that was the idea from the very beginning, was we would, begin with American parts, but we would, at the end, be using all domestically made parts. This not only would make Japan more independent, it would help boost and bolster their aerospace industry. It's just a good step forward for Japan's rehabilitation. So here, there would be 178 planes made by Mitsubishi, and as time went on, they were increasingly made with fewer American parts and more Japanese. That means there was a total of 210 pilot tubes. These witty wings are just fidgety. Luckily, they're rubber and they straighten out. Anywho. Come on. I'll do it later. So, they started delivering from Mitsubishi the first planes in early 1962. And until early 1965, these would be the ones built with American parts. And then until 1967, at the end of the deliveries to the JASDF, they would be Japanese parts. And the first ones would be accepted into service, and they would begin training, conversion, transition work in 1963. And then the first squadrons that were declared combat capable, combat ready, would appear in 1966. A total of 7 squads would eventually fly the Starfighter, the Glory, in Japan. And to help train with them, that's where the DJ comes from. Now, no DJs were built in Japan from all Japanese parts. All of 20 of these were assembled by Mitsubishi using American parts. They were essentially American built for all intents and purposes, just with some final work done in Japan. And there was only 20, so yeah. Now the DJ was a true hybrid of the F-104D and the F-104J. For example, whereas the D used a little bit different engine from its C counterpart, the DJ used the same engine as the J. It was also fully combat capable, having the same weapons system and targeting system as the J. Now the J, since it couldn't have ground attack, was pretty much limited to carrying up to 4 AIM-9 Sidewinders. It also could carry external fuel tanks, but it could not carry bombs. It also was not capable of aerial refueling, because as a defense fighter, it wasn't felt necessary that it would be needed. And it had the 20mm M61 cannon with about 750 rounds. The DJ, likewise, could carry up to 4 missiles or tanks. But to make room for the second crew member, the instructor, the fuel tankage was decreased some, and the 20mm cannon was not installed. Otherwise, the size and everything are about the same. And so, yeah, it was an Interceptor for training and whatnot. And it was flown by the Japanese throughout the 70s. And they had about the same luck with it as everyone else. It was not a bad plane, but during its service, they would lose 34 J models to various accidents and mishaps, and they would lose 2 DJ models to accidents. So it was not without its shortcomings. I've done a full video on the Starfighter, so you can check that out. I mean, it was a hot rod plane. It's capable of Mach 2. Very long and slender. About 54 feet long with a wingspan of only about 22 feet. Had a maximum altitude of about 50,000 feet and a very good climb rate. But yeah, of course, by the 70s, Japan would have its first domestically designed and built combat jet, the F-1, but this was more of a close air support ground attack version, so the F-104 was in service. But this was joined by the F-104J, the Japanese version of the Phantom. And then in 1981, at the end of the year, its official replacement was accepted into service, the F-15J Peace Eagle. So once that was available, squadrons began turning in their 104Js and DJs as they converted over. And in March of 1986, the last 104Js were retired from Japanese service. Now, one reason I brought out the Taiwanese 104D, now this model is actually of a U.S. Air Force one that Taiwan acquired, but in 1987, Japan transferred 22 J models and 5 DJ models to Taiwan. So they did fly the DJ. So, close enough, why not? Honestly, if the Hobbymaster DJs were cheaper, I might pick one up, but no. This one will do just dandy. And I'd love to have a Hobbymaster 104J, but they don't seem to make one, at least not recently. So I've had this Woody Wings for a while. So let's end by just talking about the models. The Hobbymaster is your typical gear up or down, crew figures in or out, canopy open close, and ordnance, such as it is, which isn't a much with this one, just fuel tanks on or off. The Woody Wings basically has no display options. It is wheels down, canopy closed, although it does have a pilot figure in there. And it has permanently attached tanks. The Hobbymaster is generally speaking a better looking and higher quality model. But the Woody Wings is pretty much all metal, whereas the Hobbymaster has some polymer in it, like for example the tail. So if you go to pick one up, the Woody Wings actually weighs quite a bit more. It also has rolling gear. And again, it does come with a pilot, which is good. So it actually feels pretty darn substantial. But it's Woody Wings. I mean, the paint scheme is acceptable, but nothing special. But of course, they're relatively inexpensive. At least when they came out, they were about $25 to $35 models. Whereas Hobbymasters are anywhere from $50 to $80, depending on when and where and which exact model. So, but the Woody Wings are no longer in production either, so what it is. I basically have the 104J because it is available and I haven't found anything better, and it's not a bad, it really isn't a bad model. It feels good in the hand. It really does feel like die-cast, and it's solid, it's not hollow. The Hobbymaster 104s, I like them, I have several, but they are relatively light because, well, it's a relatively light little plane in 1/72 scale. So yeah, hopefully I got something on camera to show you. Now I'm going to go straighten my pedo tube. those happen on these, and they're actually removable if you need to replace one, which is nice. But since it's not on a stand, being on a shelf, it gets bumped. No biggie. But yeah, I'm just trying to do justice to the JASDF, talking about all their planes. So anyway, if you have any comments or questions, or if you can add anything to the Japanese F-104J's history, I'd love to hear it, because there's just not a lot out there on these specifically. And if you'd like to just talk more about the Starfighter itself in general, you can check out my older video on it. With that, I'm going to let you go. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.